Today I would like to tell you a few words about Xamarin Platform and how to start creating mobile applications. Just to make a long story short, that's a slide about me. If you want to contact me after this session, you can find me, for instance, on the Twitter. But let's start. It's not about me, it's about the Xamarin Platform. So, the first thing here is how we can start creating mobile applications on Xamarin, using Xamarin for Android and iOS. But before that, I would like to say about architecting mobile apps, because it's very important, because I would like to compare this with some other approaches. So, that's the standard approach, I think. Everyone here knows that's silo approach, and this is this basic approach when we are creating iOS applications with Objective-C and Swift using Xcode environment. For Android, we are using Java and Android Studio, and for Windows, of course, C# and Visual Studio. And that's great. If you decide that you would like to use this approach, that's your decision. If you have free developers and budget for this application, it's good. And you can, of course, this application can be crafted to perfection, just to clarify. The second approach is write once, run everywhere. And this approach is connected with every hybrid approaches. So, for instance, using JavaScript, HTML, CSS. So some hybrid platforms like Apache Cordova or Ionic. So you can also decide to create those mobile applications with this. But the disadvantage here is that you cannot create great user interface crafted to perfection with those app generators. Of course, you can try, but at the end, this is not as good as with silo approach. But then we have Xamarin unique approach, and this is very important because, as you can see here, we have shared C# code as a backend for this application. But I'm not talking about backend in the cloud, the service we are connecting to. I'm talking about the functionality and the logic of the application. But you are able to create unique user experience. So, for instance, on the iOS, you can use storyboards, and that's okay with Xamarin. On Android platform, you can use Designer with XML, and that's also okay, so you can just stay on this platform and with the functionality of the user interface. And of course, on Windows, you can use XAML, so you can create this design crafted on each platform. But when you look on the code behind, you will see C#. So there is no Objective-C or Swift for iOS, there is no Java for Android, and of course, there is C# for Windows, but I'm talking mainly about those two platforms. And what's unique about the Xamarin also? That's very important that if we of course look on the APIs for Windows, we are able to use them because it's C#. So C# is always connected with Windows development. But if we look on the iOS platform and APIs, there is also coverage. So, for instance, if you decide that you would like to use MapKit or UIKit, you are able to do it with Xamarin. There is full access to that. There are wrappers, so you are still able to use those APIs on the iOS. On the Android, the situation is similar because, for instance, if you decide to use text-to-speech or some other APIs like NFC, you are also able to do it with C#. So there are also wrappers that enables you to create this application with C# without Java. Okay, but that's about APIs, and this is the introduction. So I would like you to know that you are able to access native APIs on the Xamarin platform, and that's very important. Before I go to the section about where you can start the Xamarin and the whole journey with Xamarin, I would like to also say that it's also very good about Xamarin that it was acquired by Microsoft. I must say it. Sorry, but this is very important because if we look on the other approaches, for instance, on the Apache Cordova, there is a really good support from Microsoft about Xamarin. There is full documentation, there are updates, so it's not about that you are using library from the past, it's really updated. You have great connection with the Xamarin team. So if you decide to, for instance, create some application, but you don't know how to do it, you don't know the documentation, there is really good response from the Xamarin team. There are also many samples in the internet, I will show that. But it's good to say that, it's important to say that with Xamarin you have really great community and great support from not only Xamarin but also other developers that are using Xamarin and C# language to create applications. If you decide that you would like to start your journey with Xamarin, you have two options. The first option is Visual Studio on the Windows. So that's the first thing. Of course, there will be Visual Studio 2017, and you will be able to use it on the Mac computers. But we are here, so it's for Windows, Visual Studio. If you decide to install this developer environment, you should select C#, .NET, Xamarin, and you will be able to use this platform. So it's included in Visual Studio. You do not have to go on some other website, download some many components, and so on. It's included in Visual Studio. But of course, if you decide that you would like to stay on Mac because you prefer this kind of machine, there is no problem. You can still use Xamarin and C#, of course, on the Mac with Xamarin Studio. There is full support for Android applications, iOS applications, but there is one exception, and I would like to also say about it. You cannot create Windows applications with Xamarin Studio on Mac. So if you decide, for instance, to open the whole project on the Mac computer in Xamarin Studio, there will be iOS project available and Android and iOS project available, but there will be no UWP platform. And this is something that can be confusing, but do not worry, it will be available with Visual Studio 2017 on Mac, so you will be able to create all three platforms, whether it's Windows or Mac computer. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about the developer experience. You would like to create beautiful apps, you would like to have access to the designer. And let's start with Android. Of course, at the end, I will show you example in Visual Studio, but let me introduce the platform. So you have full access to Android Designer. You can, of course, use drag and drop, you can create some layouts, you can use native Android controls, and there is no problem with that. Of course, you have you are able to open the source code, so you can just type the code. So Android XML, there is no problem with that. And of course, you can test your user interface on different devices, on different sizes. There is also option in Visual Studio that you, for instance, can test your application on the smaller devices and bigger devices. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you would like to test your application, of course you can connect your mobile device to the computer, but there are emulators for Android on the Windows. So that's also interesting because when you are installing Visual Studio, you can select that you would like to use emulators from Microsoft, and you will be able to, as you can see, select different versions of Android. That's the first thing, very important. And of course, different sizes. So you can test phones, phablets, tablets, and you can all do it with emulators for Visual Studio. With that, I would like to say that if you decide to use other emulators, Yes, so for instance, Xamarin Player, Android Player, so you will be able to use it. You are able to use Genymotion if you decide. No problem, you can do it with Visual Studio also. But I think the more interesting thing is about iOS, because Android, okay, we know that we can create applications on Windows, but what about iOS? That's also interesting. So before I say about the designer and about simulators for iOS, I would like to say that you cannot create iOS applications on Windows with Xamarin without connection to your Mac. So there are two options. The first thing, you have your own Mac at home and you just connect to the remote host and you will be able to display Designer and also simulator for Visual Studio. Or you have second option, you can just buy subscription, Mac in Cloud subscription, and you will be able to connect to the remote host and use it with Visual Studio. So I just want to say it because, to be honest, it can be confusing. There are many questions about that. So you need connection to Mac from Windows computer. If you are creating mobile apps with Xamarin on Mac, that's obvious, you don't need a Windows computer. One exception if you decide to create Windows applications. Okay, so Xamarin Designer for iOS. If you connect to the remote host, you have full access to iOS Designer on Windows. So you can create storyboards, you can use drag and drop to fill the layout, to use different controls. There is no problem with that. You can of course test this user interface on the different devices also. And that's about Visual Studio iOS simulator. When you are on Mac, you have full access to your Xcode simulators, yes, but there was confusion about simulators on Visual Studio. So yes, you are able to use iOS simulator on Windows, but also there is this one exception that you must be connected to your Mac machine. And once you do it, you are able to display your applications on the dedicated iOS simulator from Xamarin. So that's also interesting. This is something new, of course. The official version was released this year, and you can create those applications. Yes, so if you prefer to use Visual Studio, for instance, you are C# developer and you would like to try your mobile skills with Visual Studio, you can just use Visual Studio. You have access to iOS Designer and also iOS Simulator. So that's the second thing. But also there is some difference between this basic mobile approach. So about creating mobile apps with, for instance, Android Studio and Xcode for iOS, because with Xamarin, you have two options to share the code. So the first thing here is portable class libraries. So you can just write code once, as in the C# language. You can package this code and use on the different platforms. I will show this in Visual Studio, but I would like to show you these two approaches. So the first approach is portable class library, when you can place all your common code and then share it between platforms. And that's very important because you write your code once. You don't have to create free versions of your code. And what is really also important, I think, it's NuGet package. What's that? I think that .NET developers are familiar with that, but I will explain. Once you create such portable class library, you can publish it. So if you discover some great library that will have access to photos on iOS and Android, you can package this code as a NuGet package and publish this. So other developers can download your package, install it in the project of the application and use it. So that's also very important because there are many NuGet packages dedicated for Xamarin platform that you can use. So for instance, sharing photo across the platforms, access to the camera, for instance, check the internet connection. So there are differences on the Android, on the iOS, and Windows. And with those components, you can just use one code and discover, for instance, internet connection on all three platforms. And the second approach, it's called shared projects. This is quite different because you are creating different parts of the code dedicated for each platform. So, for instance, I will also try to show you this in the code. But if you decide that this part of code, for instance, will be used only on Android, you must use the directive. So if Android platform, use this code. If iOS platform, use this different kind of code. So I recommend to use the first approach, to use portable class library, because it's also good to maintain and also test this code after you create the application. You would like to create some unit tests, so portable class libraries are more comfortable to do it. Okay, but the last thing I would like to tell you and show also, there are plugins for Xamarin. That's what I said before. So what's that? If you would like to use the component to check internet connectivity, or you would like to use the code connected with sharing photos or access to the camera or access to the GPS, you can use something like something that is called plugin. Install this in your project, and then you can use across the platforms. So you don't have to worry about the functionality on the different platforms because there is one code. And let me show you this because I think that's very interesting in the code. So as you can see, this is the structure of Xamarin application. And it's also worth to say that you have two approaches when you decide to create application with Xamarin. Let me show you. If I click File, New, and then Project, and I select Cross-Platform tab here, I have access to different Xamarin projects, but this is cross-platform. So I'm creating one user interface with XAML language. I will show you in a minute. And then I'm creating one code behind, so one business logic with C# for my application. So let me show you the first approach. As you can see, you can select Xamarin Forms. This is Xamarin Forms shared project. Here is shared project. So that's the first approach. But you can also select Xamarin Forms Portable. So portable class library. Once I select this project, because as I said, I prefer portable class libraries, it will create such structure in the Visual Studio. And what's here? The first project contains everything what is common for those all three projects. So for Android, iOS, and UWP platform. And this is very important also to have this structure as you can see here. So this is the pattern called MVVM, so model view view model. I suppose that someone could hear this in the past. And what's interesting about model view view model is that you separate your views. So as you can see, I have pages here. So main page, I will open the designer and show you that. I have main page where I have code for my user interface on the main page of my application. As you can see, here is the content page and also one button. And this is worth to say that you are creating application with XAML language. So you are not using storyboards like for iOS or XML like for Android. You are using just XAML language to create your user interface. And what can be confusing that you cannot see your user interface, and that's something what Xamarin changed, and also this is important to mention, that before you hadn't access to the user interface. You could not see it in the designer. The one there was only one way to see your user interface, just to launch it on the real device. And now Xamarin created something what is called Xamarin Forms Previewer. And let me open that. Xamarin Forms Previewer. And as you can see, I can display this previewer. It's not working so good on Windows yet, but I have, there is a still chance that they will improve it in the nearest future. But I can switch between two platforms, Android, and also there is iOS tab. So I can switch it and see how my user interface will look like on the different platforms. So for instance, on the Android and on the iOS. And that's the first thing. As you can see, it's not working properly now, and that's something I told you that this is new component in Xamarin. So it's working better on Mac in the Xamarin Studio. So just to confirm that it's working better on the Xamarin Studio on Mac. But there is this structure, as I said, and I have my pages here. So I'm creating only one page, and it will be rendered on the different platforms. So on the Android, on the iOS, and on Windows. So for instance, if I declare here this control called button, this will be UI button on iOS, button on Android, and also button on Windows. So there are renderers that Xamarin contains, and this button will be rendered natively on each platform. That's really important to remember, that this control will be native. That's the first thing. The second thing here is that there is a model. So for instance, here I have one class called person. As you can see, there is name, surname, and some information, some list with information about this person. And this is model. So as I told you, there is model, view, view model. So this is my model. And also I'm using view models to pin my views with the code behind, so with the logic. So for instance, I will open main view model and I will show you. Here I have the whole functionality for my main page. So there is also convention to name view models as with the same prefix as pages. So as you can see, I have main page here in the pages folder, and I have main view model. And this view model contains the whole code responsible to handle different actions on my user interface. So for instance, this navigate command here is responsible for navigating between main page and details page when I click navigate button. As I showed you before, if I open main page, I have this button. And here, this is this button. And here, I have command called navigate command. And then if I go to the main view model, I have this command. And let me show you. This command is responsible for creating new object. This is very simple. Creating new object and passing this to the next page. So I'm using navigation service that navigate to. I'm typing the type of the page where I would like to navigate, and then I'm passing the parameter. So here, person object. And this is really important when you decide to create Xamarin Forms applications, to have this structure. So pages, your views, view models, so the functionality responsible for handling different user interface actions, and also model, so your business logic, but also, as you can see, I have infrastructure folder. And in this folder, I have different services. So for instance, here I have navigation service responsible for handling the navigation on each platform. And I don't have much time to describe everything, but I would like you to know that I'm writing this code once. So, for instance, when I'm calling navigation service navigate. I will show you this in a second. Let me show you main view model. When I'm calling this line of code, navigation service navigate, and I'm typing the type of the page and parameter, I'm writing this only once. And this will be handled on the Android, iOS, and Windows platform. So I do not have to create 3 lines of code, so for Android, for iOS, for Windows. I'm just saying navigation service navigate to, what is the type of the page, so details page. What I would like to pass, I would like to pass person object, and just, I'm doing like you see. What is also important, that here I have some services. So, for instance, this is the class written in C#, responsible for connecting to Microsoft Cognitive Services, sending image stream, and then retrieving the information about the image. So, for instance, I can click and I can do the photo, I can send it to Cognitive Services, and then have some response about some information about the image. So this is the first approach, as you can see. And here I have also Android project, iOS project, and UWP project. But what is really important here, as you can see, that I do not have to create any user interface code here. So in my Android project, I do not have any XML Android code. In the iOS, as you can see, I have only launch screen storyboard, but I do not have any code responsible for main page, for details page. Everything is created in this PCL project. So it's only written once. And the same is for UWP platform here. I do not have to create any user interface here, any code. I'm using only this PCL project. So that's the first approach, yes? So I'm creating one user interface and one business logic and code behind for the functionality. And what is the disadvantage of this approach? If you decide that you would like to create an application crafted to perfection, you will not be able to do it with Xamarin Forms, because as you can see, we are using XAML code, and some functionality is not supported with Xamarin Forms. So if you would like to create great user interface, but also use C# code as code behind, so write the code once, you have the second approach. Let me show you. The second approach here is called Xamarin Platform. And what is the difference between Xamarin Forms and Xamarin Platform? The main difference is that for Android, for instance, for iOS, you are creating dedicated user interface. So here, if I open, for instance, code responsible for creating tab bar, it will open the Android Designer. Of course, it's loading here, but just give me a few seconds. I will try to show you. Okay, that there are still some problems, but never mind. What's really important about this approach, as you can see, I'm using standard Android XML code here for user interface. So I can create crafted user interface for Android. I can also open iOS project and open storyboard to create iOS application. Just let me close this. I'm not sure if I will be able to show you that. Okay, sorry, I do not have the resource for that, so I will just create the new project and show you that. In this File New tab, instead of using cross-platform, so Xamarin Forms, I can create, as I said, I can use Xamarin Platform. So, for instance, I can select iOS tab, and here I can select many different project templates for iPhone. For instance, blank application. It will create standard iOS project where I can use storyboards for creating user interface, but code behind will be written in C#. The same is for Android. So let me show you. If I select Android tab, I can create blank application for Android, and I will do it now. So let me just create it on the desktop folder. Desktop, okay. And if after a few seconds, as you can see, I have here Xamarin project. And main activity, just let me show you. There is code for main activity. As you can see, it inherits from Android activity. There is also onCreate method, you know from Android platform. There is also set content view, so you can pin your layouts to your activity code. And if I open resources, layout, and main, this is the code responsible for creating main page. And as you can see here, there is Android XML, so I can create a crafted user interface on Android. If I decide to create new project, but for iOS, I will have access to storyboards. But the code behind is written in C#. And this is really nice because, for instance, if I decide to add iOS project here, so I will add new project to this solution. I will select iOS and, for instance, iPhone application, and I will add it to the solution. Here, as you can see, I have iOS project. And the structure of this project is quite the same like in the Xcode. And if I open, for instance, here, the main class, as you can see, there is some additional code added by Xamarin, but here, just let me open, there is also class appDelegate. As you can see, there are methods known from iOS. So finish launching, I can add some views to my main window, and many different methods added by Xamarin by default. So onActivated, will terminate. So all methods known from the iOS. So this is also nice because, as you can see, you can use C# language, but access iOS native APIs. And this structure, as you can see, is really it's quite similar like the standard iOS project in the Xcode. So I have info playlist, I have many different files in my project. If I open Android project here, I have resources, layout, drawable, where I can insert many different icons, for instance. I have values folder, I have strings, so I can use it normally with Xamarin. And I think that's nice because if I decide here that, okay, I've created great user interface for iOS with storyboards, for Android with XML and Designer, that's really good. But now I would like to share my code behind. I don't want to write this one code 3 times. I would like to use only one code. So if I decide, for instance, to open the photos library or to check internet connection, I don't want to do it 3 times. And with Xamarin, you are able to really do it, and the decision which approach you will choose, so whether it will be Xamarin Forms, so creating a common user interface and code behind, or Xamarin Platforms, so using storyboards for iOS, XML for Android, and also pages for Windows. It's your decision, but remember, please, that with Xamarin Forms, you have smaller chances to do a crafted design, but you can just make your application faster. So with Xamarin Forms, if you decide to create, for instance, business application where you would like to display some data to the user, but you are not concentrated on the great user experience, displaying data is more important, you can use Xamarin Forms. But if you decide that, okay, I don't have a lot of time, but we would like to create great user interface, you can use Xamarin Platform, you can use storyboards, you can use XML for Android, you can use Windows Pages here, and you are still able to use C# as code behind. So here in this project, I can also add PCL, so Portable Class Library, and once I do it, so when I click Add, New Project, for instance, I can add PCL here and create common code for these two projects. And if I decide that, okay, great, we have Android application, we have iOS application, so now we would like to support also Windows. You can also support Windows. You are selecting Windows tab, blank app, Universal Windows. You click OK. You must select, of course, the target platform of the Universal Windows. Once you click OK, in a few seconds, Windows project is added to the solution. So as you can see here, just let me show you. As you can see here, I have standard Universal Windows Platform project with the same structure as normal Universal application project. And now I can create one user interface. I can create one code behind with C#, and I'm able to use it. And I think this it's also important to show you this emulator. This is emulator for Android. I'm not able to show you iOS simulator because, as I told, I need to connect to my Mac machine, but not now. I do not have internet connection. But as you can see, here is the emulator for Android. And what I can show you, without the internet, it will be hard. But this is application created with Xamarin Forms. So as you can see, master detail page. I can navigate, I can take picture here. So for instance, I have access to the library. And then I can open this photo in the application. And I think that's really important. There will be, I suppose, exception. But this experience will be different on the iOS platform. So do not worry, it does not look on the iOS like this. Xamarin will render it per platform. So on the Windows, the tab will be different, on the iOS tab will be different, and on Android. So there are custom renderers used by Xamarin to display this user interface on the different platforms. And at the end, I think it's worth to mention where you can also start learning Xamarin, because this session is also about where you can start. So there is great content provided by Xamarin. As I told you, the Xamarin is, I think, one of the most supported platforms, cross platforms. When we look on the Apache Cordova, for instance, on the Ionic, I see that Xamarin and Microsoft is pushing really good content about the whole platform. So for instance, here there is Xamarin Show available on the Channel 9 platform. There is a URL, you can go to this page and watch. There is a series about different Xamarin approaches, and also many samples, many discussions. There are also great people responsible for creating different libraries for Xamarin. So that's the first source where you can start Xamarin. Instead of that, there is also great Xamarin documentation, and it's also up to date. So when you go to developer.xamarin.com, you are able to see some samples. You can also download some ready samples from GitHub. So you don't have to create your own code. You can just take some code, change it, and it will work. The second source is Xamarin Planet. This is this is blog. This is blog about the community of Xamarin. You can find this is blog aggregator, so you can find many different blogs about Xamarin. And I think it's also good to go here because there are many samples. There are people that are interested in Xamarin, creating some great content and providing some samples. So you are still able to connect with them and see some interesting things about Xamarin. And the last thing here. This is, I would like to say one word about my group. It's called Xamarin Warsaw Mobile Developers, and I would like to invite you also if you decide to start your journey with Xamarin and you would like to see some samples and learn something more. You can join our meetup and join us and learn something interesting. And that's it, I think. The time is quite okay, I think. So thank you very much. If you have any questions and I'll be able to answer them, I will try.
Yeah, so I would like to ask you if it's, in your opinion, it's only about cross-platform functionality. Would you recommend Xamarin for someone who don't want to write cross-platform app, just focusing on one platform, or in your opinion, is it pointless? Or?
Okay, so thank you. That's a very good question. In my opinion, I think that if you are, for instance, concentrated on the iOS platform only, and you know that you will stay with this platform, you don't want to learn anything new in the future, I think it's not a good idea to start with Xamarin, to start this cross-platform development, because you are just concentrated on one thing. But on the other side, .NET is developing, as you know, probably. And I think it's good to, even if you decide to stay with iOS, for instance, it's good to try Xamarin and try to see different approach. Because maybe in the future there will be project when someone will decide that, okay, great, you know iOS, but maybe you can use something else and create some other applications, some apps for other platforms. So in my private opinion, I will try Xamarin, but if you prefer to stay on the one platform, it's just to check this platform, to be honest. So that's it. Any other questions? Yes?
Is it possible to use constraint layouts with Xamarin?
Yes. 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 Yes, it's possible.
What about entry cost?
Entry costs? Okay, so that's also a good question. Thank you. So Xamarin is free. You can install this with Visual Studio Community. But also, to be honest, if you have 5 people in your team, it's free. But if you're planning to create some enterprise applications, you have big company, you have to buy Visual Studio Enterprise, and then you have to pay. But if you would like to test Xamarin just to play with it, you can download Visual Studio Community free edition, and you can just start it. It's free, totally free.
And I believe that if you're a freelancer but working for a big company, you still have to buy the license.
Yes, that's about Microsoft licenses. So, yeah.
Yes. What about some libraries? Are there any available? There are some platform-specific libraries. And what if you would like to use any of them? Is there any possibility?
Yes, there is a possibility to just wrap the code. So if you have this native code, for instance, for Android, if you created library for Android in Java, yeah? Because it's about your question. Yeah. Is it correct? Okay. So if you decided to create some plugin in Java for Android, you will be still able to link it from the Xamarin. It's a complicated process. It's not so easy. It's not about, okay, import that library and it's working. No, that's not true. You have to wrap it, but it's possible, yes.
But of course, there is no way to use an Android library with iOS. It's not possible, yeah?
And Android, no, I don't know anything like this. I don't know anything like this. here.
There was something like this, like 1 year ago, if I remember correctly. That's what I'd like to ask actually. Xamarin acquired pretty interesting solution as RoboVM. That was kinda Android Studio with Java code, but it can be, you can separate business logic in Java and you can write UI logic for Android, so it's actually Android code, but also you can include iOS code in Java. And there was this problem with libraries, and they were just transforming this basic Java Android libraries to iOS libraries. So that's actually my question. Are there any news about RoboVM, because it was quite...
No, so I want to be honest. I do not have any information about that, any updates. So that's what I can say. To just be honest, because I don't know. I don't know everything about the platform. So I'm trying to learn everything new every day. But no, I have no information about that. Sorry. Yes.
Okay, so how does the process of uploading your app to, for example, App Store looks like? Somewhat different or
Okay.
exactly the same?
Yes, so it's quite the same. You still need to, for instance, for iOS, create provisioning profile. Yes, this certificate, and you are able to do the whole upload from the Xamarin Studio, for instance, if you are on Mac. So the process is really similar to the Xcode. You are still able to do it without any problems. So yeah, so there is no magic about that.
What about the review? Is it
About the review, no. Apple doesn't check whether you are using Xamarin or native code, because you are asking about the review from Apple about Xamarin. Yes. No, they do not check it. There is no problem about that.
What's the support? When Apple, I don't know, delivers new iOS or Google delivers new version of Android, what's the wait time for a new version of Xamarin which will support new versions of host OS?
Great question also, thank you. It's about weeks now. Xamarin is so concentrated to stay up to date, believe me, that after you have some new library for iOS or Android, they are trying to create wrappers and release it as soon as possible. So about weeks, 1 month, I think it's a long time, but about weeks.
Yeah, weeks, months is not a lot of time.
Yeah, that's true.
And I have also another question. What are the most, I don't know, difficult bugs which you met in the Xamarin SDK? Like you can sometimes, I don't know, find a bug in the Android SDK or iOS SDK, and on top of that you also have Xamarin SDK. Does it happen? Is it buggy sometimes? Is it difficult to find that the problem is not in your code or host OS code, is in the Xamarin?
Okay, so yes, also a good question. So to be honest, I had some problems with Xamarin, but it was about staying up to date. So for instance, there were some new libraries from Google in the repository. And then I downloaded the latest version from Xamarin. I rebuilt the application, but it was not working on the device. There was information that, okay, you have to change something, you must copy native libraries, and so on and so on. So that was and I think is now the main disadvantage of Xamarin sometimes, that if you are not up to date with the whole SDKs, for Android, for instance, it's problematic. But on the other hand, if you're talking about some problems with accessing iOS native APIs, Android, no, I did not have any problems like that. But it's maybe it's maybe because I was not creating such crafted applications per platform. I'm involved in the enterprise applications, and you are mostly concentrated on the common code than on the user interface. It's like this. So with Xamarin, you know what I mean. That you are with Xamarin Forms, for instance, this application looks good, but it doesn't have to be crafted to perfection. And it's sometimes the most important thing is to shed code.
Enterprise, but not the end client.
Yes, yes, yes. That's it.
If I can ask one more question. You said that it's important to stay up to date with SDKs, with Xamarin. What if I need to, because my client requests it, to support some old OS version, like, I don't know, right now we have iOS 10, I need to support iOS 8 or 7 and 10. Both of them or all of them with the in between.
Okay, so
Possible? Is it difficult?
yes, so with Xamarin, you are still able to decide which versions of platforms, so Android or iOS, which platforms you would like to support. So, as you saw, the structure is quite the same. I can open the app manifest on Android, for instance, and decide that, okay, I would like to support Android KitKat, and the target version will be other Android version. So the process is quite the same. But if you decide that, because I'm not sure if is it a good answer to you, or you just concentrating on how you can just include some old libraries that are not supported by Xamarin, but other platforms.
That is not being up to date and being up to date at the same time, because I need to support old OS version, which is not possible to support when you're using the newest SDK from Apple for iOS. Because when you use the newest Xcode for iOS 7, you can support iOS 7, so you need to go one number earlier.
Okay.
And could it mean some problems for Android? Would it, I don't know, mean that I need to use older version of Xamarin?
Okay, so no, you can use updated version of Xamarin, but it's about target platform. You are still able to select which version of platform you will support. That's the first thing. And the second thing, that you have also option with Xamarin to decide on which platform, for instance, you would like to use which fragment of code. So that's also worth to mention, that this is possible with Xamarin. You will be able to do it for Android, for iOS, and for UWP platform. Thank you. Any other questions I can answer?
Yeah, how is the final app created? Because what I imagine is that when you have, for example, Android code wrapped into C#, you have some part of it generated into Java, and then you access the C# business logic through Java native interface. Is it like this?
Yes, it's like this. So, on the Android, when you have your app package, there is mono runtime instead your standard Android code. So still, if you open this app package, you will see that there is mono, there is C#, but on the other hand, there are standard Android libraries. So that's the situation on the Android. But there is different situation with reference to iOS, because it's about Apple license. You cannot just include C# code in the application and they will approve that. So that's why you need to, yeah. So that's why you need to connect to the remote host on your Mac machine, and your application will be built on the Mac computer, will be compiled to the native code, and then it will work on the iOS. So there is no component included in the iOS. The whole code is really native. So that's the difference between iOS and Android.
And what about supporting different CPU architectures in Android? Does the package contain both x86 and ARM native parts?
To be honest, I do not remember this. So I'll be honest, I can check it and answer, but now I don't want to say something that I will regret. So I prefer to say I don't remember. Sorry. Any other questions? I will be able to answer, of course.
What is the third-party support for Xamarin platform? Like, I remember back in the days when the Windows Phone was a new thing, there was a problem with third-party libraries that most of them would not work, would not be compatible. Like, the ones that worked on the .NET platform were not compatible with the Windows Phone. How does it fare against Xamarin right now?
Okay, so the first thing it's about the community. So if you decide that you would like to use some third parties libraries and some code created, oh sorry, that's this part. There is really great community in Xamarin. So even if you do not have any support for some library, there is, I think, 99% that someone will create it soon from the community or from Xamarin. So, for instance, this is good example. For instance, if you go to github.com/Xamarin/plugins, you will find many different third-party plugins written by users from community, developers from community, not from the Xamarin. So, because you are asking about the support of third-party libraries, or you are asking about, for instance, support for Facebook library?
It's just those plugins, I understand that they integrate with the iOS or Android.
Yes.
But what I meant actually was like native C# libraries. Like, for example, I want to use the dependency injection container. It was built using C#. Can I use that with Xamarin provided?
Yes, of course. So, for instance, just let me share the screen. I will just switch to duplicate. So, for instance, this application, as you can see, this Xamarin Forms application is created with MVVM Lite library. The same library, you are able to create Windows Phone applications. So if I open PCL here, I have, of course, just let me open, View Model Locator. As you can see, this is everything from MVVM Lite. So headers here. So you are able to use MVVM Lite, you are able to use Prism, MVVM Cross. So there is whole support for Xamarin of those libraries. So you are free to use IOC, so dependency injection, yes. Any other questions?
In the long run, how would you compare the overall cost of creating one Xamarin application against creating two native Android and iOS applications?
Okay, that's also a good question.
And I add to that with platform-specific UI.
Okay.
Answer both for the colleague, anything you would like, and for me with platform-specific.
Okay, so just to say it in the percentage, I think that if you decide to create Xamarin platform application, so native UI code, it will be like just to say the good figure here. For instance, if you decide to create native application, and that will be example, you need to spend 100 hours, for instance. But if you decide to create an application with Xamarin, here you need to spend about 60-70 hours. So that's the difference here with Xamarin platform. But if you decide to create application with Xamarin Forms, even a half of that, because you are creating only one user interface, as I showed you. So only one code for user interface and one code for code behind, so for the whole functionality. So even 50% lower cost of time with Xamarin Forms. But please remember that you will not be able to create as beautiful application as like with Xamarin Platform.
Correctly, with Xamarin Forms, you big ones, it runs everywhere. So if per platform it will be 100 hours, it will be 100 hours with forms for free platforms. Yeah.
Yes, because, yes.
Like 60, 70 per platform and using Xamarin Platform, right?
Yes, because still you need to create this user interface for Android, for Windows, for iOS, but the code behind will be common between those free projects. So yeah, and also remember, please remember that it's your own decision. That it depends on the project. If you have some enterprise project where you would like to decide to create application faster, it's not about user interface, it's about the general functionality and so on. You can use Xamarin Forms, but sometimes I know some projects from my colleagues, for instance, that they are creating Xamarin applications, but only with Xamarin Platform approach. So they are creating dedicated user interfaces per platform, but using common C# code. That's the case.
So maybe one more question.
Yes.
So, could you give us examples of apps which were created with Xamarin? So popular apps, like you can download it from Google Play Store or App Store.
Okay, so the first any popular app. I encourage you to, for instance, check my application created with Xamarin Platform. I think it will be also a good experience. I cannot connect to the internet, but I would like to show you this this page. But never mind, it's easy because it's called Enter for Free. And if you enter the website, it should be available. I'm not sure because I was changing something on the backend side. But if you type, just let me open. Enter for free.pl. You will be able to download this application created with Xamarin Platform for iOS and Android. And you can check, and any feedback is welcome. Don't be afraid to say what do you think about this application. So it's good or it's. But any other examples here? So this question. People always ask this question, and it's hard to say, but because many applications were created with Xamarin for enterprise. So, for instance, Coca-Cola created their application with Xamarin. Kellogg's, so some cornflakes, they created their application with Xamarin.
All of those apps are for enterprise.
All those apps are for enterprise for them. I know that Alaska Airlines created their application with Xamarin also, but it's for them. But some commercial products, it's hard to find. I'm not sure if AXA, this insurance company, created application with Xamarin for clients. But I'm not sure. But I remember something like this. So it's quite new, to be honest, and for instance, startups currently decide to use Xamarin because it's faster, and they are creating their apps because there is good support from Xamarin. They can really achieve faster result, but I cannot say any examples like from my head now as any commercial products.
I believe that's Microsoft Pix. That's a Microsoft application, photo-related one. Microsoft Pix, it's only for iOS.
I know this application, but it's in Xamarin. Okay, so good. So I didn't know that. so this is this application for creating these great photos with slow motion and.
No idea, to be honest. It's on the
Okay.
Let's try it. But I know that most recently I saw a tweet from Miguel de Icaza, so the creator of Xamarin. He was super excited that Microsoft is up using Xamarin.
Oh, great! So.
It's not for Android, it's only for iOS. That's kind of fun. But,
Okay, so that can be some proof that you can really create iOS applications with C#. And at the end, I would like to add one more thing here. I know that there are many platforms in this world, so Windows, Android, iOS, and so on. But it's also about the code, because if you look on the Microsoft approach and how .NET Framework is developing, you can create .NET applications on Linux, on Mac computers, on the Windows computers. It's good also to think, maybe I should just try this C#, try this user experience with Visual Studio. Maybe it will be something that will be interesting. I can create applications for all platforms. So it's good. And remember that with Xamarin you can also create applications for Mac computers. So not only for iPhones, iPads, but also for the Mac computers. So I really encourage you to try .NET, to try Visual Studio, and not only Xamarin, but just to try .NET Framework and C# language, because it can be something new, something interesting. And when we look on the way and on the roadmap, I think it will be interesting year, connected with development with C#. Okay, thank you very much.